All right, what I understand of the Quran burnings was that somehow a bunch of them got placed into an incinerator. And from what I've read, it sounds like the U.S. government is saying that they were mistakenly put into the incinerator, but I'm guessing there's differing views between governments. But people got pretty upset about it, and there was a bunch of riots, and a bunch of people got killed.
My first reaction when I heard about the 16 civilians being killed by a U.S. soldier was that I thought it was a tragedy. I felt like it probably gave Americans a really bad name, especially in Afghanistan when we're trying to do so much good for their country.
Okay, so there was a soldier, a U.S. soldier, that suffered some sort of probably a mental breakdown, and sometime I don't know, like early in the morning or something, he went into a bunch of people, like three or four houses, and killed like 16 people and like burned their bodies. And yeah, it was pretty terrible. And I think he went back to the base and was really just calm about it and just turned himself in, which is pretty disturbing.
Media is trying to portray the Koran burnings as accidental by the Americans, and that the government is kind of backing that up and saying that we completely did it on accident and that we didn't mean to offend anybody. But I think that the Muslims are taking it very offensively and are very upset with us. Shooting, I think that our media is trying to kind of cover it up and say, like, we're really sorry that it happened, but the one thing that I watched said that they thought he had a traumatic brain disorder that had happened right before that, so it's almost like they're trying to find something else to pin it on rather than just saying, he was mad, he screwed up. And again, they are obviously really upset that it happened, and I think it's almost, they kind of like want revenge, it seems like.
Both of the news sources did a pretty good job covering both of the stories. I think that those are two pretty big stories, and I think they did a good job of giving like the main facts that needed to be said in that short of amount of time. I think they got all the major events in, and I don't feel like they were being biased towards either side, so that was also a good thing.
In the first video that I watched that discussed Sergeant Bale's accident tragedy, I thought that the newscast did a great job on discussing the issue. I felt like they were unbiased for the most part, but I wish that they would have interviewed maybe some civilians in Afghanistan about the tragedy. They seemed to just interview people that were close with Sergeant Bales to his defense. I know that in the past there has been a lot of soldiers that have been like tormented from the war, and I feel that America should go out and try to help them and their families and not send them back if they feel that they might go through a psychotic break. As for the second video, I believe that the newscast did a great job. Again, I wish I would have interviewed people from Afghanistan, Muslims that might have had some input on it. I know that they probably wouldn't have been happy, but other than that, I felt like it was fairly unbiased and unstereotypical.
I believe the media did a fairly good job of presenting the material in these two clips without bias, and if they did at all, it would have been in the first one where they only interviewed a Army lieutenant for the United States about the issue and not someone from the foreign government.
The Koran burning, they more made it sound like the Americans were, it was more of a mistake, like they were doing it on purpose. And with the story about the American shootings, kind of took it his side and said, like, talked about how he was a good guy, but they also, I guess they weren't as biased because they said that the war had changed him as a person. So
the media should have portrayed both sides a little bit better. I felt like it was very Americanized and that we didn't really take into account anything that they had to say. I felt like more government officials should have been interviewed and talked to and seen how they were feeling and what they wanted to do about it, what they expected from us as Americans. And yeah.
The news source about the Quran burnings did an especially good job of kind of showing both sides of the story. They were able to say that the Americans made a mistake, but they're also able to acknowledge the fact that the Quran is a really important book to many Muslims, and the consequences that come from such a action are going to stir up a lot of negative feelings. So they're able to say both, that the Americans made a mistake, but they can see both sides of the story, and they can see why so many people would be so upset about something like that happening. I think the news source about the shootings, the 16 civilians killed, did a good job of kind of giving the background of the shooter, but I would have liked to have seen more reactions from maybe people who were personally affected, like in Afghanistan, maybe family members or something like that. It would have been good to see both sides of the story rather than just the one American viewpoint.
I feel that the news stations covered these two issues fairly well. They supplied a decent amount of details without supplying too many.
The Korean burnings, they should have asked more like Afghanistan people how they felt about it, and like asked more people in the military what actually happened if they knew that the Koreans were in there, instead of just asking one person what's going on. With regards to the shooting, they should have asked military people that were close to Sergeant what his personality was in the military.
I think if the Muslims saw this video, they would be upset because it just seems like the American media doesn't give any background information. It just kind of shows that for like the Quran burnings, it just shows them like running around in the streets and like almost like they're going crazy, and doesn't give any background information as to really what's going on or what we did to upset them, or how it affected them so much. So I think they would probably be really upset with us.
If I were a Muslim watching these videos, I would feel pretty good about it, because they both did a good job of giving all the facts, and I don't think either of them were really too biased towards one side. But I would have also liked to have seen the families' reactions, or like more of the Afghanistan side of the shootings, just to get kind of more of a feel of how it's really affected people close to the actual event that happened.
I was a Muslim and I had viewed these videos. I feel like I would be almost on the brink of infuriation. I would have been very angry with how the American government and the American news stations would have portrayed the events. In both cases, the facts provided almost showed pity for the American side of things in both, that the Army made a mistake, and that they're the ones that messed up, and there wasn't much attention paid to the riots. And then within the case of the massacres, there really isn't much detail provided on who was massacred, what their background is, but yet we get an interview with a neighbor back home of the lieutenant charged, and we hear a almost sob story about how this couldn't have been this man to commit this, and there's people that died and we don't speak to their families at all. So I think if I was Muslim, I would have been very angry with how this was presented.
As a Muslim person, I would be pretty upset about this, just because, they didn't really take or give much advice, like talk about the burnings much. They should have asked the people from Afghanistan, and also talked to more soldiers and said, hey, did you know if anyone knew that the Koreans were there? With regards to the shooting, I would be upset just because he's killing innocent people. I would want to know, like, if he had reason, like if he thought they had a gun or something like that as well. They didn't really talk about that as much, but I'd want to get some more information about that.
If we are to keep talking about this and discussing it on the news, that more information needs to be put out as to what the Americans did. We definitely need to show the Muslim side of it. I think it's news. It needs to be fair and it needs to be accurate. And as for our relationship, I think this just worsens our relationship that we have with the Afghanistani people and all of them, and just definitely doesn't accomplish what we wanted to accomplish when we went over there, and just pisses them off.
I think that the American government should keep trying to hold more press conferences and just try to get all the facts out there, so that everyone's on the same page and nothing is withheld from anybody, so that everyone everyone has all the facts and everyone knows exactly what's going on. I think it definitely will. Both of these events will hurt our relationship with Afghanistan. Obviously, you can see the rallies and people screaming "Death to America" and all that kind of stuff. So that's definitely not good.
Ultimately, I feel like America and Afghanistan had a fairly good relationship before this tragedy, especially the shootings of the 16 civilians. I think it's going to take a while for things to smooth over. I know that President Obama had like a great relationship with the Afghan president, and I know from this video that the Afghan president is probably going to point fingers in America's way, and he's going to want things to change and for the sergeant to see the death penalty probably as a consequence. So it'll be interesting to see how America handles this.
I think that after this, our relationship with Afghanistan will probably get worse than it has been lately, just because they think that the Americans purposely burnt the Quran, which is going like their religion. It'd be the same if Afghanistan people were here and they burnt Bibles, whether it was on accident or on purpose. People would be upset, and it'd cause problems between our countries. With regards to the shooting, that's going to hurt it too, just because what they hear is that he killed innocent people on purpose, and clearly that's going to make people upset.
The situation was flipped around. Americans would portray themselves as very victimized. We want to be in control and we want to be dominant and the powerful nation, so I think that we would definitely retaliate and just portray them as in a very negative way. And again, I don't think that that's fair to anybody. I think that we should portray things the way they are and just give enough information for both sides to be accurate.
I personally don't care who it is doing what killing, who's killing whom, but I think if you kill someone, that's terrible, and I think no matter who you are or who you're killing, it's awful, and every murder is terrible, no matter what the background is or whatever. I think that the American community would probably react pretty similarly to the Afghanistan riots and stuff. I think people would be pretty upset. But in my personal opinion, a murder is a murder, and it doesn't matter who is killing. It's just terrible.
Not all Muslims are violent. I believe that there are Muslims that are terrorists, but I don't think that it's in the religion to be a violent group of people. So if Muslims were to come to America and shoot innocent people, they would be terrorists. We would not go to war with Muslims.
If these two cases were to be flipped around and Bibles were burned and a Muslim was in the United States and shot innocent people and massacred them, I feel the response from the United States people would be just as what it would be from the Muslim riots, and a lot of hatred. But then also I think on the global scale there might be a lot more attention drawn to it, just because the United States I feel is always at the forefront of news across the world. And so I think there would be a little bit more attention paid to it because we were the quote-unquote victims, which I don't think is fair always. But I feel like that's how the event would be handled. Again, not necessarily saying that's how I believe it should be handled, but that's what I think our nation would do.
I think as consequence to what the sergeant did, and for the American image, that they're going to probably have to give him the death penalty in order to smooth over things with Afghanistan. There has to be consequences, and he killed 15 people. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you.